year reflects, I think, a desire on our part to make this more of a discussion meeting than a press focus. Will provide an excellent basis for lively discussion. But first, Max, on the key headline this year is that while fatalities have decreased slightly this year from last year, conflicts remain enduring, many are intractable, and many are what we call simmering, continuing to operate with a risk that at any time they could boil over. Perhaps the most striking statistic this year, given all the focus on conflicts in the Middle East, in Syria, Iraq, Libya, is that the conflict that suffered the second greatest amount of fatalities after Syria was Mexico, with 23,000 fatalities last year in Mexico. A conflict that doesn't have artillery and tanks and air power, small arms alone, and yet many people suffered in Mexico this year as a result of that conflict. And perhaps depressing for the fact the conflict does not feature the artillery, tanks, fighter jets and bombers. Clearly, Islamic State decided that it wished to control territory, to be able to develop a caliphate and give some reality to its title of Islamic State. And with the loss of territory will come a change in Islamic State's tactics. Territory was a burden for the Islamic State. They needed to govern it, they needed to manage it, they needed to deploy individuals away from just fighting into providing social services. Now liberated from having to govern, they perhaps have more resources to radicalize people over the internet. So we don't believe that the loss of territory by Islamic State results in a severe diminution of their capability, only that they will again change their tactics from using conventional styles of warfare back to these more informal systems of radicalizing possible adherence to their cause and doing attacks left, right and center, including, unfortunately, in Europe, as we've seen so frequently in the last 6 months. Intelligence agencies and international organizations. Those of you interested in trying out the database are invited to do so. These kinds of civil conflicts almost always emerge as a consequence of poor governance, and it's not simply a question of teasing out a more effective balance of power between rebel groups and state authorities, not simply a question of installing some new constitution that gives greater autonomy to areas in which certain ethnic groups might be predominantly resident. It really is a question of trying from the bottom up to institutionalize better systems of good governance, because without good governance these conflicts are bound to continue to simmer and then perhaps boil over again. So our appeal, which perhaps sounds like a counsel of perfection, is as peacemakers approach a problem, as politicians approach conflict resolution, they have to have at the center and front of their ambition techniques to introduce better good governance in these areas.